The world around us is amazing, but if we examine it under a microscope, it becomes even more incredible. A single drop of water can hide an entire world. A trivial grain of sand is astonishing in its diversity and complexity, and a puncture mark can turn out to be a giant hole. This is infinity, and in this episode, I'll show you 11 ordinary things under a microscope that'll amaze you. Look closely at the skin. Examine it in the smallest detail. You'll see lines, fine hairs, and maybe something else. But only with a microscope can we see as many details as possible. If we look at the skin with a not very powerful microscope, we can see the epidermis in enough detail. If we use a more powerful microscope, we can see the sebaceous glands, hair follicles, and even fat. While if you use the best microscopes, then the skin ceases to look like skin at all. In such photos, you can hardly recognize the skin cover. I also suggest taking a look at what a needle looks like under a microscope. First, the needle itself does not look very familiar because we usually imagine it to be round. We can see exactly how it goes into the skin and what remains after such a puncture. What we can barely see with the naked eye looks like a giant hole under a microscope, as if it were a crater or a cave, but this is just a puncture mark. Clean water implies purity and safety, which is logical. We don't hesitate to drink clean water, but we don't even know that we can find a lot of interesting things in it. Even clean water can contain microscopic trash, creepy protozoa, and even microscopic algae. But still, if all this is in clean water, then in very small quantities, so it's safe to drink such water. But dirty water is a different case. If we look at it under a microscope, we'll see a whole world teeming with microorganisms, dangerous bacteria, and bacilli. Just imagine how it all gets into the human body, and this could very well happen, for example, if a person accidentally takes a drink of water on the beach. And this is what concrete dirt looks like. Dirt under the fingernails. From the outside, it looks like a painting by some impressionist, but that's the kind of world living in people who don't take care of their hygiene. I think this is a prime example of why you should take care of your nails. Okay, let's take our minds off these horror stories and look at something beautiful – sand. It would seem that sand is almost the most trivial thing on the planet. But if we look at it under a microscope, we see that it represents a whole world. It's hard not to be surprised by the diversity of sand under a microscope. You can find all kinds of particles, all different in color, shape, and size. Also amazing how complex the sand really is. This is literally the whole universe, and this is far from the greatest magnification. We haven't gotten to the atoms, after all. By the way, one interesting fact says that the sand is the whole world. Scientists believe that in 1 grain of sand, there are more atoms than grains of sand in the whole world. Let's look at another loose thing – table salt. You can pause the video, run to the kitchen, pour some salt into the palm of your hand, and try to look at the crystals. On the surface, they'll be relatively large, but it's unlikely you'll see anything else. But if we look at the salt under a microscope, we'll see fairly even, cube-shaped crystals. Note that unlike sand, there's unity here. The size of the cubes is almost the same, and their shape is close to the ideal. The reason is that in crystalline bodies, the particles are arranged in a strict order, forming spatial, periodic repeating structures in the whole volume of the body. That's why crystals of the same substance, including salt, are so similar to each other. Have you ever wondered why a ballpoint pen is called a ballpoint pen? If we look at it under a microscope, everything becomes obvious. We can see how the ball with the ink literally rolls around on the surface of the paper, leaving traces. This footage looks mesmerizing, so just watch for a few seconds. And here are a couple more shots of pens. In this shot, you see a new pen. It's almost in perfect condition, even by microscope standards. It's a pleasure to hold a pen like this. But here's the old pen. It's really shabby. There's dirt on the ball and everything around is moldy. I'm surprised that without magnification, this pen would look quite normal. I think you all know exactly how our hair grows, but have you ever seen exactly how it grows? Thanks to the microscope, in this footage, we can see where the hair on the beard grows from. The hair can be seen quite clearly, and we can see the beginning of the hair under the skin. And if we enlarge the image even more, we can see everything in the smallest details. For example, in these shots, we can see the difference between healthy and damaged hair. The damaged one has flaking scales. This can happen when hair is not cared for or is cared for too well. This is what brittle hair looks like. And it's true. Under the microscope, everything is literally brittle. And this is what split-end hair looks like. Under magnification, you can see that it branches out like a broom and is capable of destroying the hair to the root. Now, do you understand why split ends need to be trimmed? And a little more about the body. Next stop is the tongue. It's no secret that the tongue has papillae, which we use to distinguish tastes. Under a microscope, they look like this. They look more like some kind of stalagmites, pink caps, or mountains, don't they? And this is what a tongue with plaque looks like. Looks like a seabed with coral, don't you agree? A good reminder of why your tongue, like your teeth, also needs to be brushed regularly. And here's another tongue under a microscope. And no, it doesn't belong to a person, it's a cat's tongue. It seems that there are thousands of sharp daggers, spades, and tips in a cat's mouth. To a certain extent, it is. If you have a cat, you've paid attention to its rough tongue. All members of the feline family have a very rough and tough tongue. First of all, cats need it to lick and comb out their thick fur. And secondly, it's a hunting tool. The rough tongue works like sandpaper and helps the predator to better separate the meat from the bones of its prey and therefore to eat more of it. Are there any sewing lovers among you?
Bodyguard? I do drapes.
If you're one of those people, hit the like button and see what your main tools look like in the enlarged view. This is the appearance of a needle and a thread. Under a microscope, the thread doesn't look like something whole. It has its own threads, but smaller ones. And the needle eye under the microscope looks very big. Looking at this footage, it's hard to understand why we're constantly agonizing over trying to get the thread through the needle eye. And here's a maximum magnification. This is what a needle eye with thread looks like under the most powerful microscope. Continuing the topic of sharp objects, next we have the razor blade. This is what a razor blade looks like under a microscope. Pay attention to those pits and depressions. The more of them, the sharper the razor. And this is what the blades of a more popular razor, or more precisely, a shaving stick, looks like. Plus, this shows the shaving process. Notice how the razor gradually gets clogged with small hairs, which we then shake off into the sink or rinse under a stream of water. But you can't wash all these hairs out completely away. Over time, they get clogged up in the blades, and it's impossible to get them out. You can see it here. You're looking at the blades of a new shaving stick and an old one. The blades are worn out, there's hair inside, and there's bumps everywhere. Such a razor is worth replacing so as to not cut yourself. Speaking of cuts, it's very easy to cut yourself with a blunt knife because it can slip on your finger when cutting food. This is what it looks like under a microscope, almost perfectly smooth surface. But if you sharpen it a few times, those very indentations will appear, which I already showed you in the beginning, and the knife will become sharp and safe for use. And the final thing is Velcro. I'm sure you'll find a few things with Velcro in your closet. The principle of operation is clear. The fastener works on the principle of the thorny burr plant. When the two tapes come into contact, the micro hooks cling to the micro loops and stick to one another. This is how it looks like under the microscope. Under magnification, the principle of operation becomes as clear as possible. The two parts literally bind to each other. As you can see, all things under the microscope are literally a whole space, a whole universe in which you can see a lot of interesting things. Speaking of space, let's go there now and look at our planet. Believe me, from space it doesn't always look like a beautiful blue ball. From some places in the universe, our Earth looks like a real speck of dust, and now you'll see it. Let's start with something closer, like this legendary photograph. It's probably the most famous picture of our planet. It has a name, the Blue Marble, and it was taken by the crew of Apollo 17 in December 1972. The picture clearly shows Antarctica, Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. So far, we're close to the Earth, so it's possible to view it in details. Let's get away from our blue marble and fly up to the moon. This photo is also quite famous. It was taken from the moon. It also has its own name, Earthrise. The picture was taken by the Apollo 8 crew in December 1968 while they were circling the moon. Earth is still perfectly visible, and we can see the oceans and continents, but no longer in details. In addition to the Apollos, others have photographed Earth too. For example, interplanetary stations and apparatuses. Here's a famous picture of Voyager 1 taken on September 18, 1977 from a distance of 7.2 million miles from Earth. This is one of the first images of Earth and the Moon in one frame. By the way, remember Voyager 1. I'll get back to it. And here's a similar image taken by the Galileo spacecraft from a distance of 3.8 million miles in 1992. This image was taken in 2003 from the Mars Express station at a distance of 4.9 million miles. Earth can still be seen quite well, but the images are already blurry. Now let's take a picture of our planet from Mars. You can hardly see anything here, but NASA helped us and highlighted a tiny dot in the sky. That's our planet. And here's another image of the Martian sky. The brighter dot is Venus. The less bright one with arrows pointing to it is our home planet. Let's go even further away. And from the red planet, we'll go to Saturn. In 2017, the Cassini spacecraft visited Saturn. The apparatus captured not only the beautiful rings of the gas giant, but also our home world. Yes, that's the bright spot. At the time, the spacecraft was 870 million miles from Earth, which makes this photo one of the most distant portraits of our planet taken from space. At this point, you can experience an existential crisis. It would seem that we can't go any further. But I left the most interesting thing for the final. Do you remember Voyager 1? Yeah, the one that took the picture of Earth from over 6.8 million miles away? Well, that was far from its limit. The fact is that Voyager 1 is the farthest man-made object from Earth. At the time of the creation of this episode, it's over 14.2 billion miles from Earth. That's 156 trips from the Earth to the Sun. So, in 1990, Voyager 1 took a legendary picture. This was called Pale B Dot. This faintly visible dot on the brown stripe on the right is our planet. This photo was taken from a distance of 3.7 billion miles. That's all, guys. Would you like to go to another planet to take a new photo of Earth? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you later.